Hello, welcome. So I wanted to run a theory by the two people that watch this. Um, what are your thoughts on the fact that maybe, not the fact, what are your thoughts on the possibility that Jesus may have lied? I know it's a crazy thought, and I don't strictly mean lying in the sense that he was trying to deceive. Um, but it's interesting that I was reading the Bible the other day, and there is a passage where Jesus is referring to Moses, and Moses was saying something, but it was within the consideration of who he was talking to. Hmm. So the passage that I'm referring to is in the New Testament. Um, let's see, Mark 10:2. So let me just read it a little bit for you. You can read along if you like. So the Pharisees came and asked him, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" They were testing him. And he answered and said to them, "What did Moses command you?" They said, "Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and to dismiss her." And Jesus answered and said to them, "Because of the hardness of your heart, he wrote you this precept. But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So then they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let not man separate." So I found this interesting because he was referring to, well, I mean, the Pharisees were referring to Moses because Moses essentially at the time was giving them permission that, hey, if you were having trouble at home with your wife, you have permission to divorce her, all is well. And Jesus came back and said that the only reason why that Moses said that was because he knew about the hardness of their hearts. Now, is there, what has changed, right, between the time of Moses and the time of Jesus? Well, a lot has changed, right? The context of the greater humanity has changed. Um, in some situations for the better and some for the worse, but generally for the better. And so, what was he trying to convey here? Well, a couple things, right? Is it possible that maybe what he was saying was in consideration of who he was talking to and knew that it would be recorded in history for others to follow? So why backtrack, right? What's the idea here? Well, my interpretation, and take it or leave it, um, is that essentially it's a way to navigate sin, the sinful nature of man. And so if you give mankind an out when they make a commitment to God and you give them the possibility that they can backtrack, um, it's kind of in human nature to want your cake and eat it too, right? So was Jesus trying to circumvent that nature within us? Um, and if that was the case, why not just say so? And that's where I think saying what he said with reference to Moses and the hardness of hearts of man, I think the same thing kind of applies to his situation. He was literally talking to people that were looking for any excuse to throw him in jail. They were looking for a reason why they could go to the people and be like, this guy's a fraud. So within that context, right? What he said was not only appropriate, but it echoes in time. And so the content in here in the Bible, I mean, it doesn't change, but perspective does, right? There are obviously some things in the Bible that don't really have a place in today's age, right? And I think he knew about that. And so this is where free will kind of comes into play, right? We read something like this and we have the ability, the freedom to interpret. He said the words hundreds of years ago to people that were looking for a reason to kill him, to throw him in jail. And now the context has changed. Not saying that you should just willy-nilly just leave your relationship and get divorced. Again, I think it's pointing to something that is like a subtext, which is interesting because you've got the context and then you've got subtext. Anyway, so the subtext of it is that because of our sinful nature, we probably don't want to give ourselves permission too many times to leave our spouse, whom we promised to God that we were going to be with forever. You see how this kind of like, if you make that kind of a commitment and it's easily broken and it's okay because it has said so in the Bible, or that somebody with authority has said that it was okay, then it must be okay. And then it starts like this ugly ball of sin rolling. And I'm not saying this as in like from a place of judgment. It's just like, is a person who has 4 or 5 divorces really happy? Probably not. Is a person who is married to one person happy? Probably not. No. Well, who knows? I mean, it depends on the situation. But I think what I'm trying to get at here is that Jesus knew the context of his situation, and he also knew that we would be reading this in the Bible, his words in the Bible, in the future, and that maybe we don't have to read it word for word. We can kind of infer and interpret what his intention was. And then this is where my kind of theme, with the Bible being a guideline rather than just a bullet point of things that you need to follow. Like, oh, if I get married, I can never get a divorce, right? Well, I mean, obviously there's situations where you definitely don't want to be with this person anymore. I mean, sure, maybe you would have liked to have had more consideration before you jumped that point, but Jesus will understand. God will understand, right? But you have to be honest, right? And that's the whole thing here. That's the whole enchilada, right? The Bible is a guideline. And divorce and marriage is not something to be taken lightly because it's a slippery slope. And Jesus knew that, which is why I think he said what he said when he said it. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.